My 21F, childhood best friend, 21M, has been acting distant ever since I got a boyfriend. And I just found out the shocking reason why. Now I don't know what to do. My 21F and my best friend, Matt, 21M, have been inseparable for as long as I can remember. We met in kindergarten, bonded over our shared love for Pokemon, and never looked back. Over the years, he's been my rock, my confidant, my partner in crime. People always assumed we were dating, but it was never like that. Matt is like a brother to me, a slightly annoying, overly protective brother who knows me better than anyone. I've had boyfriends before, and he's had girlfriends. It's never been a big deal, we've always prioritized our friendship above everything else. But something changed 4 months ago when I started dating Nick. Nick is great. He's kind, funny, and ambitious, and I really like him. We met at a friend's party, hit it off immediately, and things have been amazing ever since. I was so excited to introduce him to Matt because Matt's opinion means everything to me. If Matt didn't like him, I'd seriously reconsider the relationship. When they met, everything seemed fine on the surface. Matt was polite, maybe a little quiet, but I didn't think much of it. He's always been a bit reserved around new people. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice subtle changes. Matt wasn't texting me as much. He stopped coming over for our weekly movie nights. Whenever I suggested hanging out, he always seemed to have an excuse: work, studying, or some vague "I'm just tired" response. The few times we did hang out, he felt different. Distant. Like he was holding something back. At first, I thought he just didn't like Nick. I asked him about it, but he shrugged it off. He's fine, he said, but his tone was off. When I pressed him, he changed the subject. I started to feel paranoid, replaying every interaction in my head. Was Nick too overbearing? Did he say something to offend Matt? I even asked Nick if he thought Matt didn't like him. Nick just laughed and said, "He probably just misses having you all to himself." That comment stuck with me, but I brushed it off. Matt and I have been through so much together. If he had a problem, he'd tell me, right? A few nights ago, it all came to a head. I texted Matt to ask if he wanted to grab dinner. I missed him, and I was determined to figure out what was going on. To my surprise, he agreed. We went to our favorite diner, the one we've been going to since we were kids. It felt nostalgic and bittersweet, sitting across from him in our usual booth. But the tension was thick. He barely made eye contact and spent most of the meal pushing his fries around his plate. "Matt, what's going on?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. He looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected me to confront him. "What do you mean? You've been off. Distant. Ever since I started dating Nick. Did I do something to upset you?" He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "You didn't do anything. Then what is it? Do you not like him? Because if that's the case, I need you to be honest with me." "It's not about him," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "Then what is it about?" "Because I feel like I'm losing my best friend, and I don't understand why." He didn't answer right away. He just stared down at his plate, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, "I'm happy for you, okay? You deserve to be happy." "That's not an answer," I said, my frustration bubbling over. "Why can't you just talk to me?" "I am talking to you," he snapped, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. Heads turned, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. He immediately looked guilty and lowered his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell." I was stunned. Matt never yelled at me. Ever. "Matt," I started, but he cut me off. "Forget it," he said, standing up and throwing some cash on the table. "I'll see you around." And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty booth across from me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why was he being so difficult? What wasn't he telling me? When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed the conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every expression. And then it hit me. Matt has feelings for me. The realization knocked the wind out of me. It was like a puzzle piece snapping into place, and suddenly, everything made sense. The way he'd always been so protective of me. The way he never liked any of my boyfriends. The way he'd been pulling away ever since Nick came into the picture. How had I been so blind? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call him, to confront him, to get everything out in the open. But another part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined our friendship by bringing it up? Or worse, what if I was right? The truth is, I don't feel that way about Matt. I never have. He's my best friend, my brother in all but blood. The thought of losing him over this made my chest ache. For the next few days, I gave him space. I didn't text or call, and he didn't reach out either. Nick noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. How do you explain to your boyfriend that your best friend might be in love with you? Eventually, Matt broke the silence. He texted me, asking if we could talk. I agreed, and we met up at a park near his house. It was a cool, crisp evening, and the air felt heavy with unspoken words. We sat on a bench, the silence stretching between us. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been a shitty friend." "You haven't," I said quickly. "I mean, yeah, you've been distant, but I get it. Things have changed." He shook his head. "It's not just that." "Then what is it?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because I don't understand, Matt. I don't understand why everything's different now." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and my heart sank. His eyes were filled with so much pain, it was almost unbearable. "I love you," he said simply. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My brain was screaming at me to say something, but I was frozen. "I've loved you for years," he continued, his voice cracking. "But I never said anything because I didn't want to ruin what we have. And then you started dating Nick, and I realized I'd missed my chance. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. It hurts too much." "Matt," I finally managed to say, but he held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything. I know you don't feel the same way. I've always known. I needed you to know. Because I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." Tears blurred my vision, and I reached out to grab his hand. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." "I know," he said with a sad smile. "It's not your fault." We sat there for a long time, holding hands in the fading light. Neither of us spoke, and I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. I wanted to comfort him, to promise him that everything would be okay, but I didn't know if it would be. That was a week ago. Things are still awkward between us, but we're trying. I told Nick what happened, and he's been incredibly understanding. He even suggested giving Matt some space so he can figure out his feelings. I don't know what the future holds for our friendship, but I hope we can get through this. Matt is too important to me to lose. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time. Update: my best friend confessed his feelings, and now everything's a mess. I didn't expect so many people to respond to my first post. A lot of you had kind words, while others told me to cut Matt off or even break up with Nick. I thought I was handling things as well as I could, but, honestly, everything has gotten so much worse. Let me back up. After Matt's confession, I decided to give him space like a lot of you suggested. I wanted to respect his feelings while trying to figure out how to salvage our friendship. I didn't text or call him, and he didn't reach out to me either. It was painful, but I thought the distance might help us both process everything. That brings me to Nick. I told him the bare minimum, that Matt had feelings for me, and it was the reason he'd been distant. Nick was understanding, at least at first. He told me he trusted me and that he wasn't threatened by Matt's feelings. For a moment, I thought things would be okay. But I underestimated how quickly everything could unravel. The first crack appeared a few days later. Nick started asking subtle questions about Matt. Has he always been this protective of you? Do you think he ever resented your other boyfriends? Do you think he's jealous of me? I tried to reassure him, but he kept circling back to it. Then came the kicker. I had no idea Nick had been talking to one of our mutual friends, who apparently spilled way more about my history with Matt than I ever did. She told Nick that people always thought Matt and I would end up together, that we were basically inseparable, and even mentioned a time in high school when Matt got into a fight with a guy who'd cheated on me. Nick confronted me about it, asking why I hadn't told him these things. He wasn't yelling, but I could see the frustration all over his face. Why would you keep something like that from me? He asked. Because it's not relevant, I said, my voice rising in frustration. Matt is my friend. That's all he's ever been to me. But that's not all you are to him, Nick shot back. You've been blind to his feelings for years. How am I supposed to believe you're not blind to something else? That hit me like a punch to the gut. He didn't outright accuse me of cheating, but the implication was there. I was furious and heartbroken all at once. We didn't resolve the argument that night, and things have been tense ever since. As if that wasn't enough, Matt has completely ghosted me. I thought we were on the same page after his confession, that we'd take some time and eventually work things out. But he's shut me out entirely. No texts, no calls, nothing. I even tried showing up at his place, but his roommate said he wasn't home, which I'm 90% sure was a lie. The worst part? I saw a photo on Instagram of Matt at a bar with some mutual friends that same night. He's avoiding me on purpose. The breaking point came last night. Nick and I were supposed to have a date night, but he showed up late and barely said a word during dinner. When I pressed him, he finally admitted what was bothering him. I don't think I can do this, he said, staring at his plate. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. This? Us? I feel like there's a third person in this relationship, and it's not fair to me. I tried to explain that Matt and I hadn't even spoken in days, that I was trying to give him space, but Nick shook his head. It's not about whether you're talking to him or not. It's about the fact that he's always going to be there in the back of your mind. And I can't compete with that. I begged him to reconsider, but he told me he needed time to think. He left, and I haven't heard from him since. So now, here I am. My best friend won't talk to me. My boyfriend might break up with me. And I feel like I've lost everything all at once. I've spent the past few days oscillating between anger, guilt, and sheer panic. Part of me is furious with Matt for putting me in this position. He waited years to confess his feelings, and now I'm the one left picking up the pieces. But another part of me feels like I've been selfish. Maybe I should have noticed how he felt sooner. Maybe I should have done more to set boundaries. And then there's Nick. I care about him so much, and the thought of losing him makes me want to scream. But how do I convince him that Matt doesn't matter in the way he thinks? At this point, I have no idea what to do. Do I reach out to Matt and try to fix things? Do I let Nick go and focus on myself? I feel like every choice I make is going to hurt someone, and I don't know if I can handle it. All I know is that everything is a mess, and I don't know how to fix it. Update: I thought things couldn't get worse, then they did. After my last update, I was determined to fix things. I couldn't just sit around and let my life fall apart without at least trying to make it right. I decided to tackle Matt first. Our friendship was the foundation of everything, and I couldn't imagine moving forward without addressing the giant elephant in the room. I showed up at his place unannounced. I know, bad idea, but I was desperate. His roommate, Jake, looked uncomfortable when he saw me at the door but eventually let me in. Matt was in his room, and when he opened the door and saw me, his expression was a mix of surprise and frustration. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside before he could close the door. "OP, now's not a good time." "Too bad," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been avoiding me for days. You don't get to just shut me out like this." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to say? I want to know why you're acting like I don't exist. I snapped. You said you loved me, and then you disappeared. Do you know how much that hurt? You're hurt, he said, his voice rising. Do you have any idea how hard this is for me? I've spent years pretending I was okay, being a just friends. Do you know how many times I've had to sit there and watch you fall for other guys while I was right there? And now you want me to just pretend everything's fine? His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, stunned. I'm sorry, he said after a moment, his voice softer. But I can't do this anymore. I can't be your best friend when I'm in love with you. It's killing me. I started crying, but he didn't move to comfort me. He just stood there, looking torn and broken. So that's it? I asked. You're just going to walk away? After everything we've been through? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know how to be around you without hurting myself. Maybe it's better if we take a break. I left his apartment feeling like a part of me had been ripped away. After the disaster with Matt, I decided to focus on Nick. He was still distant, but he hadn't officially broken up with me, so I thought I still had a chance. I invited him over to talk, and he reluctantly agreed. When he arrived, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I need to know where we stand, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you still want to be with me? He sighed, sitting down on the couch. I don't know, he admitted. I love you, but this thing with Matt, it's a lot, OP. I feel like I'm competing with a ghost. You're not, I insisted. Matt and he's just my friend. That's all he's ever been to me. But that's not all you've been to him, Nick said, his voice tinged with bitterness. And honestly, I'm not sure I believe you when you say you don't feel anything for him. That hit me harder than I expected. What are you talking about? I've seen the way you talk about him, the way you light up when you're around him. You might not realize it, but there's something there, OP. And I'm not going to stay in a relationship where I'm constantly second-guessing myself. I was stunned. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to figure out what you really want, he said, standing up. And until you do, I think we need to take a break. I tried to argue, to convince him that he was wrong, but he wouldn't budge. He left, and just like that, my relationship with Nick was over. It's been a week since everything fell apart, and I'm still trying to process it all. Matt hasn't reached out, and I haven't tried to contact him again. Nick hasn't called or texted, and I don't blame him. The worst part is, I don't know what I feel anymore. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering if Nick was right. Did I take Matt for granted? Did I overlook my own feelings for him because I was too scared to admit the truth? I thought I had my life figured out, but now I feel like I don't know anything. I've lost my best friend and my boyfriend, and I have no idea how to move forward. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time, hoping that maybe, somehow, I'll figure out what to do next. Final update, a year later, here's how everything turned out. First, I want to thank everyone who followed my messy situation with Matt and Nick. Your advice, support, and even the harsh truths really helped me reflect on my decisions. I've been doing a lot of growing since then, and while things didn't turn out the way I expected, I'm finally in a good place. Let me catch you up on what's happened over the past year. I'll get right to the point. I haven't spoken to Matt since the day I showed up at his apartment. It's strange to think that someone who was such a huge part of my life is now gone. At first, it was devastating. For weeks, I felt like I was walking around with a hole in my chest. Matt had been my best friend for so long, and losing that connection felt like losing a piece of myself. I kept wanting to call him, to apologize, to beg him to come back into my life. But I knew deep down that nothing I could say would change the situation. Matt loved me in a way I couldn't reciprocate, and no amount of time or space was going to make that okay. I realized that, as painful as it was, cutting contact was the best thing for both of us. Even if we'd tried to stay friends, his feelings would have made it impossible for him to fully move on. And honestly, I'm not sure I would have been able to move on either. It took months to accept it, but now, looking back, I understand that our friendship probably couldn't have survived no matter how hard I tried. It's heartbreaking, but I've come to terms with it. Nick and I officially broke up a few weeks after my last post. At the time, I thought it was just a break like he'd suggested, but in my heart, I think I knew it was over. For a while, we didn't talk at all. He gave me space, which I appreciated, but about 3 months later, he reached out. He asked if we could meet for coffee to talk. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity and a bit of hope. When we met up, Nick admitted that he missed me and regretted ending things. He said he had been overthinking everything about Matt and me and realized that he'd let his insecurities ruin our relationship. He wanted to give things another shot. As much as I cared about Nick, I couldn't say yes. By then, I had spent months reflecting on myself and what I wanted in a relationship. I realized that Nick's distrust, even if it came from a place of insecurity, had hurt me deeply. I needed to be with someone who trusted me fully, without second-guessing my feelings or my friendships. It wasn't an easy conversation, but I told Nick I didn't think we were right for each other anymore. He was upset but respectful. We haven't spoken since, and I think that's for the best. After everything with Matt and Nick, I spent a lot of time focusing on myself. I leaned into hobbies I'd neglected, started therapy, and even took a solo trip to a small mountain town. For the first time in years, I wasn't relying on anyone else to make me happy. It was just me, figuring out who I was outside of my relationships. Therapy was especially helpful. I worked through a lot of guilt about what happened with Matt and the role I played in our dynamic. My therapist helped me understand that while I wasn't responsible for Matt's feelings, I also needed to be more mindful of how I navigated close friendships with men in the future. I also let myself grieve. Losing Matt and Nick in such a short span of time was brutal, but eventually, the pain dulled. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. About 6 months ago, I met someone new. His name is Ethan, and he's everything I didn't realize I was looking for in a partner. We were introduced through mutual friends at a game night, and we hit it off right away. At first, I was hesitant to jump into a relationship. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes I'd made in the past, and I was scared of opening up to someone again. But Ethan made it easy. He's patient, kind, and incredibly understanding. 3 months ago, we officially started dating, and it's been amazing. One of the things I appreciate most about Ethan is how open and communicative he is. Early on, I told him everything about Matt and Nick. I didn't want to start our relationship with any secrets or misunderstandings. Ethan listened to my whole messy story without judgment. He didn't get jealous or insecure, he just asked thoughtful questions and reassured me that he trusted me completely. "I'm not going to hold your past against you," he said. "What matters is how we move forward together." Hearing that felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in a healthy, secure relationship where I can truly be myself. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be here, happily dating someone new, at peace with the past, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. Losing Matt still hurts sometimes, and I think a part of me will always miss the friendship we had. But I know now that holding on to him would have only prolonged the pain for both of us. As much as I wish things could have been different, I'm grateful for the years we spent as friends and the lessons I've learned from our fallout. As for Nick, I hope he's doing well. Despite everything, I don't have any hard feelings toward him. We just weren't meant to be, and that's okay. Most importantly, I've learned so much about myself over the past year. I've learned how to set boundaries, how to communicate better, and how to let go of relationships that no longer serve me. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. So, that's where I am now, happy, healthy, and excited for the future. If you're going through something similar, just know that it does get better. It might take time, and it might hurt like hell, but you'll come out stronger on the other side. Thank you for following my journey, Reddit. This will be my last post, but I'm signing off with a heart full of gratitude and hope.